Hello and welcome to the Chordious 2 Chord Finder tutorial. In this video I'll be going through all of the options you have available to you in the Chordious 2 Chord Finder. This tutorial assumes you already have Chordious installed. If you don't, go ahead and check out the Chordious 2 installation tutorial. And without further ado, let's go into the Chord Finder. So we have Chordious started here. I'm going to click on the Chord Finder button right here. It opens up the Chord Finder window. And I'm going to go ahead and just make it a little bit bigger here. And we can go across the top here. We have the instrument that you're trying to search for chords, the tuning that you're using for that instrument, and then you pick your root note and the quality of the chords you're trying to find. So if we look here, we can look at the instrument, and we have a bunch of different instruments here that are built into Chordious. And as you can see, for each instrument there are multiple tunings. In this case it's defaulting to reentrant C, which is the most common ukulele tuning. You have all your notes, and here are all the qualities, and there's a bunch of qualities built into Chordious. You can see if I change instruments like the guitar, the available tunings change to reflect what tunings are available on the guitar. Now it's important to note that Chordious does not use a database for its chords. Instead, you use the chord finder here to specify the parameters of the chord you're looking for, and Chordious will apply the appropriate music theory to actually look for chords on the instrument. What that means is you're not limited to just the instruments and tunings that come with Chordious. I've put in a few here to get you started, but you have these buttons here for the instruments and tunings. You can go ahead and add your own instruments and your own favorite tunings. And over here you can add your own custom chord qualities. And I'll go over both of these in some later advanced tutorials. So let's just go ahead and go back to the ukulele with the reentrant C tuning. And we'll leave it at a C major for now. And I'm going to go ahead and come down here and hit search. And as you can see, here are a whole bunch of C major chords on a reentrant C ukulele. Now, I can also go change the note. Let's say I want to look for an F major chord and hit search. And it does, now we have a bunch of F chords. And over here, let's say I wanted to find a G7, I could go to G and find a dominant 7th and search, and here are a bunch of G7 chords. So let me go back to C really quickly here. A C major. Another thing to note is, while you can come down here and click the search button, it also works if you hit the F5 key on your keyboard. So, for example, I'm up here and I'm changing options. I can just push F5 with my other hand, and that can be a little bit quicker when you're going through and changing things and searching quickly for different chords. So I hit F5. Now I'm back to looking at C major chords, because that's what I chose up here. And let's go through some of the options here and see how those change, what kind of results we get. So, first option here is the number of frets. As you can see, it's set to 5, and if you look, all of these diagrams have 5 frets in their result. So if I go here and change that to, say, 3, now I can go ahead and do search, and you'll see now I have a bunch of diagrams that are only 3 frets high. Okay. The next option here is called the max fret. So the max fret is how far up the neck you want to look for chords. By default it's set to 12, which is reasonable because after the 12th fret chords tend to repeat. So 12 is usually fine, unless you are being overwhelmed by chords and you just want to look at, say, chords lower down the neck. You could say I could put this to, say, 5. And now if I search, you'll see I have very few chords because I don't go past the 5th fret on the fretboard. The last of the numeric options here is the reach. So the reach is across how many frets are you actually want to stretch your fingers across. So it'll always be, obviously it has to be able to fit on the diagram, so that's why it's set to 3 here, because the biggest you can fit is 3. But you can also do things like if I set this reach to 2, let's say I can't reach across 3 frets. My hands are too small, or I have issues with my hands, I can't reach that far. I can set this to 2, and you'll look, so here's an example. This chord is reaching across 3 frets here, and if I hit search, you'll see that chord disappeared, because now I'm filtering out the results that I don't want. I don't, if I don't want chords that have reach across 3 frets, because I'm going to only reach across 2. So the next options here we have, so let me go ahead and set the reach back to 4, and you see that updates that automatically. Now that I want 4 frets, it's going to push that number back up. Okay, so the next options we have are allowing open strings and muted strings. So you can see here in these results, we have open strings where you're not actually fretting these strings, but you are playing them. And then you have muted strings here where you're not putting a finger down, and you're not actually strumming that string at all. You're just going to strum the other strings. So it's up to you whether or not you want to see those in your results. So if I go ahead and I set these numbers back, and I want to search. So now I have a bunch of results here. If I turn off open strings and do a search, now you can see I'm only going to see the results here that have no open strings, but I'm still allowing muted strings, so these still in there. And of course, if I uncheck the muted strings and do a search, as you can see, there's only one C major chord. This is a closed form where the maximum fret we're touching is the 5th fret right here. So the next option here is around rootless chords, and it's a little complicated, so I'm going to come back to it after I've shown you some of the other options where it makes more sense. So, one more thing. As you can see, by restricting these results, the number of results gets smaller and smaller. Let's say I set the reach to 2. As you can see, already there's only one chord here, and it needs a reach of 3. So by setting this to 2, now when I search, as you can see, Chordious throws a quick little error saying, hey, there are no chords that fit your search parameters. That doesn't mean that C major chords don't exist on a ukulele. It means that you've set some options here that make it impossible to find a chord that meet those criteria. Another option is, let's say this is 3. If I'm searching for, say, like a C, let's get a minor 13th. So a minor 13th chord has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 notes in it. A ukulele only has 4 strings. So if I search for this, there we go. We have found no chords that meet the criteria because it's impossible to play a true minor 13th chord on a ukulele. You just don't have enough strings. You need 7 strings to be able to play that. So we'll talk a little bit about how we get around that stuff later. So let me go ahead and set this back to C major. Major. Okay. Now let's start talking. Actually, let's change to a D7. So dominant 7th chord. What do we have? Okay, we have one result here. So I'm going to increase this back to 12. I'm going to give my reach, and I'm going to allow open and muted strings again. So let's go ahead and search for that. Okay, so here's a bunch of D7 chords that you can play on the ukulele. If we jump down to the style options here, these are just kind of changing the look of the base look of the results. We'll have advanced tutorials later for how to go through all the various styling options, and you can style this thing from end to end, colors, fonts, everything you want. But these are some of the things when you're creating these diagrams that you can control. So first of all is adding the title. That's this text at the top of the diagram. So I can uncheck that. And if I search, There you go, all the titles are missing. So I'm going to leave that on there. Mirror results. What mirror results does is it takes these marks and flips them from left to right. This is useful if you're creating quote-unquote left-handed chord charts where people have strung their instrument from the opposite direction. So instead of from left to right, G, C, E, A, in this case for this tuning, they did G, C, E, A from right to left. So this is that option for you left-handed players out there who want to be able to search. So if we do that really quick, you'll see that it flips. So I'm going to switch that back. The next thing here are adding root notes. So our root note is D here, and so if you want, you can make it so that the marks that are actually playing D notes where you're fretting are shown differently. So if I go ahead and check that and search, you'll see we have some D notes here, which get flagged with this diamond shape. So that is a styling option. So by saying that this is a root note, later you could change this diagram so that root notes are blue, for example, and then all of the root notes would be blue. And for the default style that comes with Chordious, a root note will look like a diamond shape. So let me go ahead and I'm going to leave that one on. The next thing we have here is called the bar type. And so if you can see, like some of these chords here, typically you would bar across the second fret here and just put one finger down. So if you want, you can put those bars in the diagram. So by default they're off, but if I say partial and search, what we have here is like this is saying, okay, you would reach across this whole, across the whole of the fretboard here and here. On this particular chord, it's saying you'd only have to reach across these two. Again, all the way across. This one, there's no barring because these strings are still open. Just barring across here. So that's what partial does. If you go to full and we search, then you'll see barring. It forces the line to go all the way across. So that's your option, and you can always and we'll see after we in later tutorials, you can always edit your diagrams later. So after you've saved this off, if you decide it's not the way you want it, you can always remove the bar later or add a new one, whatever you want. So I'm going to go and turn those back off. Okay. The next option here is the mark text. So that's letting you specify that you want to see the notes that are being played on these marks. When you edit the diagram, you can set whatever text you want, but for the Chord Finder, you can say, like, go ahead and put the notes there for me. So I'm going to go ahead, and so it's a little confusing, so we have three options here: show both, prefer flats, or prefer sharps. Chordious isn't smart enough to know which of the intervals to show which note. So for example, in a D7 chord, you're going to have an F sharp. But Chordious isn't smart enough to know that it's an F sharp instead of a G flat. So if I do show both here and do search, you'll see we have a D, A, C, and this is the F sharp / G flat, and it's really hard to see because the font is white on top of that mark. So if you know which one you're going to be using, if you do, you could do prefer flats and search, and it'll just pick the flat name for the note. Which is what you want to do sometimes, and then prefer sharps. So it leaves it up to you to pick that. Okay, so I'm going to leave that. The other option here is these called bottom marks. So let's say you don't actually want the marks, you don't want the text on the marks here, you want them underneath your diagram. So you can go ahead and check add bottom marks, and in this case I'm going to do prefer sharps, and if I search, there we go. Now we see the note names underneath the diagram, and that can be, that's the style that you want, then you can go ahead and do that. So let me go ahead and turn off them on the text themselves and search. And yeah, so here we have a bunch of D7 chords on the ukulele with the notes underneath. The root notes are flagged. You can see D, and there's those root notes. Now, let's come back to this option that I skipped earlier, allowing rootless chords. So it turns out that oftentimes when playing chords on a stringed instrument, you want to leave out certain notes. This can especially be the case if you're trying to play, for example, one of these chord qualities that requires a lot more notes than you have strings to play. And that often works because in a band situation, oftentimes someone else, usually the bassist, is playing the root note for you, and so it's not as important that you're also playing the root note. You can just be playing the higher notes in the chord. It's also the case that when we listen to music and the root note is missing, our brains do an okay job of filling that in our heads, the note that was missing, if you have the other notes in the quality. So one example that comes up on the ukulele a lot, there is a common D7 that is not showing up in here. If I go ahead and I'm allowing open strings, I'm allowing muted strings, and it's not showing up. If I go here and allow rootless chords and search, now you'll see we have this new D7 up here, which is often called a Hawaiian D7, and if you look, it doesn't have any D note. So I basically, by allowing a rootless chord, I'm saying it's okay if the root is missing. It'll still count as a D7. I still want to see those results. So there's a lot of different ways to decide which notes to leave out of a quality. And we'll go through that in a more advanced tutorial on adding custom qualities, where you can decide for yourselves if you want to have, if you want to make those kind of stylistic compromises and remove notes from qualities. But for the quick and easy, very common case where people leave out the root note, you can go ahead and use this option. This also gives you the option to, for example, play, if there's kind of a jazzy chord, like a dominant ninth. Right, if I take away rootless on a dominant ninth, yeah, there's no results, because by definition you need 5 notes and there's only 4 strings on a ukulele. But by allowing rootless chords and searching, here are some D9s. Now they're all missing that root note. You can tell they're all missing that that diamond, that D. But this is often how you're going to play a D9 on a ukulele, is by leaving out that D note and getting your and just playing the other notes in the quality. So the last couple buttons here on the left are about setting your defaults. So as you can see, I've changed a bunch of options in here, and if I close the Chord Finder, whatever I've set here is going to be lost. So if I close this and then open the Chord Finder again, we're back to where we started. The ukulele, re-entrant C, a C major, the same numbers, the same checkboxes as before. This may be fine for you if this is exactly what you're looking for, but let's say you're a guitar player and you're never going to want to start, you don't have to keep picking it every time. So you can go ahead and say, like, I want a standard guitar, right, and do set as defaults, and this will set everything on the top and on the sides. It will save that as your defaults. So if I click yes here, now when I close the Chord Finder and bring it back up, now my default instrument is a guitar at standard tuning. You can also change other options. You can say, I never like playing muted strings, I like rootless chords, and I only want to play up to the 5th fret. I can save, and I'm always playing left-handed. I can set those as the defaults, and now every time I launch the Chord Finder, those defaults are saved. Now, if you want to reset back to your defaults after you, so these are your defaults, and then you change and decide, okay, now I'm looking at a G flat major, and I've changed some of these check boxes, right? I've unchecked everything. And you decide, you want to go back to your personal defaults. You can always click the reset button here. So you don't have to exit out of the Chord Finder and start it back up again. So if I take reset to defaults, then it'll say yep, and it'll go ahead and reset everything back to the way what my defaults are. So if I do a quick, let me just go ahead and search for a G major chord with these settings. The last kind of option, and this is once you want to take the Chord Finder to the next level and you want to save these off, you're done exploring, you found the chords you want to keep, and you want to save them for later use. Here's where you can go ahead and you can select any of these. You can hold Control, select different ones, whatever you want. You can select multiple using Shift. You can even press Control A and do Select All. So you select the ones you want to keep. Like say I decide, okay, you know what, I'm going to keep these two chords, right? And then you click this big Save Selected button at the bottom. And what that's going to do is it's going to give you the option to save it to a collection in your library. And we'll go through the library in a later tutorial, or if you've gone through the Quick Start tutorial, then you already know what the library kind of looks like. And here you can specify either an existing collection. For example, here's the collection of chords that I used, that I found in the Quick Start tutorial, or you can give it a new collection name. So it's up to you. You can pick, and it'll list all of the collections that you've made, and you can pick where you want to save them. So I can go ahead and say, Chord Finder tutorial, and save those G chords in there, and then maybe I go for a D dominant 7, do another search, and then I decide, okay, I'm going to save these. So save selected, and by default it'll pick the last thing that you saved to, but you can always save to a new collection. You can always change this text. But yeah, I'm going to keep the Chord Finder tutorial and save those. So that's basically it for the Chord Finder. The one for all the basics of the Chord Finder. The one final thing is, like I said, this resets to your defaults. If I click that, it goes back to the defaults that I picked before. If for whatever reason you want to reset, you pick bad defaults and you don't know how to get back to where it was when Chordious first started, which has pretty decent defaults, what you can do is in the options, there's an option to reset back to basically the factory defaults, which is those original values. So if I just close the Chord Finder, go to options really quickly here, we'll breeze over some of this other stuff, go to Finders, and then you can do reset Chord Finder defaults. And it's going to say, hey, it's going to reset the search parameters for the built-in values. So I do yes, click OK, and now if I go back to the Chord Finder, here we go, back to that good old ukulele, C tuning, and those original checkboxes. And so that's it for the Chord Finder tutorial. If you have any questions, leave a comment below, or contact me via the website, chordious.com. And otherwise, I hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching.